China has donated emergency power equipment worth 167 million rand to South Africa. This is in addition to an agreement that was signed this week of R500 million to help deal with the energy crisis. Electricity Minister Kgosientsho Ramokgopa signed cooperation deals with 8 Chinese companies during President Xi Jinping's state visit ahead of the BRICS summit. Joining us now is energy analyst Professor Samson Mampweli. He is in Tokyo on a South African mission on hydropower. Professor Mampweli, good afternoon to you and thank you so much for your time. Just looking at all these announcements that have been made on the sideline of the BRICS summit, really promising a lot of investment to deal with the energy crisis in South Africa. But looking at China's interests, what is it that they would benefit, or is this a commensurate agreement?
Good afternoon to you and the viewers. If you look at China, China is one of our largest trading partners. So when South Africa doesn't have power to produce some of the goods, that will have to go to China, for instance. The markets that we have secured in China suffer. So it is to the best interest of China for South Africa to have enough electricity, which is why they're coming up with these kind of interventions that they have announced. So that is one of the main aspects. The other aspect is that the donations that China is bringing to South Africa will expose the Chinese technologies to the South African market, thereby increasing the chances of China to make more business in South Africa. So this is a purely business intervention that will assist both China and South Africa as well.
But just looking at the balance of power as well, Professor, in the sense that there is a potential consequence of being economically colonized or dominated even by China, and with South Africa literally going again with a begging bowl. We've seen the donations, we've seen the monies that have been pledged. Is that a potential concern that we could be economically too dependent on China especially?
That's something that we need to look out for as South Africans. We need to look at the donations from China and go into the finer details, especially of the loan agreements. I heard there was a loan in excess of 1 billion rand that has been made available. We need to know the terms of that loan and look at whether that loan, the interests are not too high on that particular loan. The issue of the donation, we also need to look closely at the 500 million that China has donated to ensure that we don't get a situation where we are given 500 million by China on one hand, and when it comes to South Africa, we are told that we need to use Chinese companies and we need to buy from China. And when that time arrives, we get these proposals that are much higher than the 500 million, and then we need to find money elsewhere to augment whatever proposals that are coming from there, thereby sinking us deep into Chinese debt. So that is something that public servants, senior public servants like the ministers need to guard against. Not to say that the work that China is doing in terms of donations of the equipment, in terms of donation of the money, is not a good gesture. It is a good gesture, but we need to look at it from that point of view as well, so that we don't move away from the West saying that they are kind of economically colonizing us, going into another trap where there's another new economic colonizer who will then who comes in the form of China. So that is something that as South Africa we need to look closely and analyze properly before we go into these particular deals. But like I said, the biggest interest for China at this particular point in time will be to secure the market in South Africa in terms of the market that we already have with the Chinese. They need to ensure that the goods flow from South Africa to China, because if that does not happen, it affects their gross domestic product. They also need to ensure that there is the market in South Africa for the Chinese goods remains, because once we don't have electricity in South Africa, we will not be able to absorb some of the Chinese imports, because there's a direct relationship between electricity production and the consumption of goods and services. I like the fact that we've got an agreement with them that allows us to learn from their power system, that also allows us to import things such as your solar panels cheaper. We have to commend government on that particular front, especially the Minister of Electricity in the presidency for striking that kind of a deal with us, because what we were seeing recently was the fact that the prices of solar panels, for instance, were starting to go higher. So with the current agreement, the prices of things such as your battery storage facilities and your solar panels will go slightly low, which will then means that most people will start to afford those kind of installations.
Yes, but Prof, let's also not lose sight or be blind, or miss the blind spot that South Africa is the gateway to a much more lucrative and larger market on the African continent. And the interest, of course, would be to then also replicate what is agreed on in South Africa between China and the BRICS, plus in the rest of the continent. Let's look at the track record of Chinese industries and their modus operandi, in the sense that they will import their own technology, their own workforce in most cases, and also tap into the fiscus that the governments have to offer in terms of tenders and those kind of operations. What are your views?
So I've attended some of the BRICS engagements, and including some of the negotiations, and those are some of the things that we were cautioning about. For instance, some of us have been saying South Africa has invested a lot of money in the research in the hydrogen economy, for instance. I'm in Japan now, negotiating with the Japanese in terms of some of the projects and programs that they want to embark on with South Africa. And the same kind of negotiations we had during the BRICS summit, to say, in the case where we've got IP, for instance, intellectual property that is in South Africa, when the Chinese come, they need to work with us and be able to use our own IP. So we produce joint IP in certain instances and then do projects together. In the instances where we don't have IP, they need to come in the form of technology localization and assist South Africa in terms of industrialization. And those two aspects, or those three aspects, can be found in the agreements that the Minister of Electricity has signed. So if there's any deviation from those kind of agreements that are already in the agreements that the minister has signed, it will be a huge oversight on the side of our government, because we're looking at industrialization in the form of Chinese bringing in manufacturing machines where we will do local manufacturing. Yes, you've talked to the market, the African market, and in the agreements, what we have said is that the Chinese, instead of setting up in the SADC region and other African countries, they need to use South Africa as a springboard, so to speak, as a market to access the African market. And if they do that, and they do local manufacturing in South Africa and technology localization, with more people from South Africa employed, South Africa can easily inject some money into some of these production facilities. And because we'll take advantage of the Africa Free Trade Agreement, for instance, which we also talked about during the BRICS summit, then we will be able to take advantage of the collaboration with the Chinese. And it's not only the Chinese, the Russians, the Brazilians, and the Indians in this particular case, in the areas where they've got strength. And then we can manufacture and for the African market. And that can grow the South African GDP quite hugely if it's properly implemented.
Prof, we're going to leave it there. We really appreciate your time on this Sunday afternoon. Thank you indeed for your time coming to us live via Zoom from Tokyo with the hydro water projects and mission that they are undertaking on behalf of the South African government. That is energy analyst Professor Samson Mampweli saying that the devil is in the detail pertaining to those agreements that Electricity Minister Hossein Tsoramokgopa had signed with the Chinese thus far.